morning and welcome to today's episode of Door Church Connect, our weekly podcast that deals with thinking and living biblically. And we're really glad to have as our guest today one of the members of our congregation, Darrell Hill. Darrell, I am very, very glad that you're with us, along with his wife, Lena, who's also in the shadows today. We are glad that she's here. They've been a great blessing to lots and lots of people, and currently oversee our Silver Sneakers ministry, which is an outreach, a ministry to those who are senior saints in our congregation. It has really taken on a whole new significance during this pandemic time, and I was thinking about this today, that Darrell's actually called me a few times to see how I was doing and if I need anything, which is a great blessing, very much appreciated. So I guess you're saying that I also fall into that demographic. Yeah, and yes. So enough said. But it's really good to have him with us today. And I love the scriptural statement in Ephesians 3:10 that says, to the intent that now the manifold wisdom of God might be made known by the church to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places. And to unpack that for you, what it's saying is from within the church. In other words, our church congregation, there are men and women who represent the manifold wisdom of God, and their lives, their insight, their testimony is actually on record, the Bible says, to principalities and powers. So it's on record to the spiritual realm, and so I'm very glad that out of our own assembly, somebody like Darrell could be with us, talk about some of his experiences and just what God has done in his life. And the burden on my heart today is actually to pick up on an interrupted conversation about racial clarity or racial reconciliation. And there is context to today's episode. Most of us can remember back to the end of May of this year, a 46-year-old black man, George Floyd, had been handcuffed and pinned to the ground for over 8 minutes by a white police officer, Derek Chauvin, and that explosive footage sparked the protests, all of the events that took place during the summer of 2020. And so on top of a global pandemic, you had this horrible incident that just multiplied some of the challenges that have been going on since the beginning of the year.
Yeah, this footage was extremely raw, obviously unedited. But my question to you, Darrell, is how did it affect you on a base level when you first saw that? What was going through your head?
It actually opened some old wounds, and I say that in the sense that because I've had personal experiences with this type of racism, but it just also reminded me of the fact that we have a long way to go still with race relations. So that's the kind of impact it had on me. And
Did you draw a straight line to other experiences that you might have had growing up?
Yes, it did. And there's a couple of experiences that stand out for me. And they're not as, obviously it's not as extreme, but I can remember when I was about 19 years old, I was in Virginia, and I had a man come up to me and say, "You don't know your place." Now, 19 years old, I'm not sure what he's talking about, but I was a healthy, strappy young man at the time, and I kind of took offense to it, and I got close enough to him to almost touch him, and I said, "I don't know what you mean by that, but show me my place." And the incident, actually, fortunately, the guy backed away, and I went my way, and I learned later, I said, I shouldn't have done that, but that's that kind of incident, and I've had other incidents. One other incident that I'll mention, or two other incidents, I'm sorry, I'll mention. I was working at that time. I was probably in my early 30s, and I just bought a house in Pittsburgh, and I had some people from work to come to my house to visit. We were having a little get together, and one of the nurses there at the house, as she got there, said to me, "How can you afford the house like this?" And it struck me kind of strange. I in my mind, I knew what she was saying to me, but my response to her was, "I bought my house the same way you bought your house." And it's just the idea that she would question me. I mean, we're not talking about a mansion of any kind, but it was a nice house. But still, why would you question how I'm able to buy a house as opposed to anyone else?
So when the things happened this spring and summer, so all these just little things just started bubbling to the surface. It wasn't like you were conjuring it. It was just kind of like
yes. They and that's why I said that they just opened those old wounds of the things that happened to me. And there was one other incident where I was with other employees, some employees that I was working with, and they invited me to a party, and I went. And when I as soon as I walked in the door, they said, "Here comes our token," which I was really set back because, I thought that I had a good rapport with these people, but obviously I didn't. So these are the kind of incidents that resurfaced when I saw this incident about George Floyd, and how the helplessness that you could hear in his voice when he's struggling, when he's saying, "I can't breathe," and how he would, I'm sure he at those moments when he realized that this is completely out of control, the level of fear. So, for me, it just like I said, brings back those moments of fear and the anxiety and the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. That I don't have control over this. So it was a very touching moment for me, and I think for many people of color, it had a similar effect.
Yeah, and that was the sense that I had, and one of the reasons that I wanted you to be on set with us is I had the sense that for a moment of time, or a moment in time, most of America was of one mind, more or less, about the brutality of what had taken place, and the opportunity for a conversation that would be helpful was there for a moment. And then my sense was that this conversation was hijacked to a degree when the protest degenerated into violence and looting, rioting, and arson, and then politicians took advantage of the whole incident, weaponizing it to promote a political agenda. And I thought, at that moment, for a real conversation was lost. And I thought this is a great time to pick it up again, where maybe there aren't all the other side issues swirling around, and we could sit down at my dining room table in my house and pick up that conversation, because I knew that having done an Instagram live event with Pastor Carnegie, that I would at some point, and hopefully today, the title of Racial Clarity, that this would bring some clarity to the issue and the clarity that comes from your own life, your own testimony, some of those things that you mentioned. Some people could easily dismiss them and say that they're small, but I'm hearing it, and it's like I'm saying, some of these people, I'm a Christian, so I can't say what I really would think, but I can tell that those are hurtful experiences, and that they send a very damaging testimony. And so I believe we're going to have real clarity today. So remind us and our listening audience how old you are now.
I am 66 years old.
All right, so 66. And so I thought, you're 66, I'm 71.
I'm 38. I'll be 39 pretty soon. Probably when this airs, I'll be 39. So.
Yeah, so Gabe is the youngster among us, and then our producer and our videographer, they're also much younger. But I thought we would begin, Darrell, with you giving a short bio of your life. And generally, if I was to ask that question of most people, and that they would start at the very beginning, their earliest recollections and things, that would be an invitation to an audiobook length episode as opposed to a podcast episode. But I know that in your case, some of the things you went through at a very, very early age had a profound impact on your life. And so, we just want to hear from you, that you can kind of give us an insight into your upbringing, some of the things that occurred and went on to shape you in life and your perspective.
Well, thank you for the opportunity again, Pastor. But first of all, I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. One of my earliest, I guess, childhood memory was probably the death of my natural father. I was 5 years old at the time he died, and I can remember having my siblings. I had three brothers and three sisters in our family. My youngest brother come along later, but at that time, my father, who was 35 years old at the time, passed away. He was in an accident, and he died. And I can remember my brothers and sisters sitting around. They were all crying, and my mother was crying. And at that time, I was too young to understand what death meant, but I could see them crying. And which meant my mother was a widow at 29 years old at that time with 6 children. She was born in Virginia, and she moved to the north. My father was in the Navy, and that's where my mother and father met. He was originally from Pittsburgh, and so they moved back to Pittsburgh after he left the Navy. And shortly thereafter, like I said, he passed away. But it was a difficult upbringing because there was a sense of not understanding death. I felt I had a sense of abandonment in some ways because I was young, so young that I thought his dying was a choice of his. So, but anyway, she did the best she could with us, and because she was in a unusual situation because living in the South being from the South rather, and moving to the North was a difficult task for many people because even though we were black, she was still seen as an outcast by many of the people in the North. So, and never having an opportunity to go back to Virginia because she felt like they were being rejected. She was being rejected there. So there was something going on there that prevented her from going back to Virginia. So we kind of in a quandary. But anyway, she did the best she could. She raised us, and we did well through God's grace and His mercy. All of us except one of us graduated from high school. Of the 7 of us, only 2 of the 7 did not go to college. I had an older brother who played football as well, and I kind of mimicked him because he was my idol. He played football. He went to the same high school I did. He ended up with a football scholarship. He played football for Northwestern State University in Oklahoma. And it's ironic because he and I played the exact same position. We made the exact same all-star team, and we had he scored 2 touchdowns as a defensive player, and I scored 2 touchdowns as a defensive player in high school. So
they're little sibling rivalry.
Yeah, little sibling rivalry. Yes,
a little bit.
I played basketball, but he didn't play. So, but it was again, like I said, my mother did the best she could, and I think it was the sports that kind of helped navigate, because some of the coaches kind of filled in for some of the for the lack of a father at that point. But I ended up going to University of California, Berkeley on a football scholarship. I stayed there a year, and I transferred to Virginia Union University, which is in Richmond, Virginia. And from there, I had a short stint in the professional ranks. So
Cal State Berkeley.
Yeah.
You're right, at the time. So this would have been what year?
And this was in 1973.
Yeah. So that is the epicenter of Marxist ideology and all kinds of radical ideas. I mean, you're right in the midst of all of this, and the picture. It's like I know you today, and it's like, wait a minute, Darrell. It doesn't seem like you fit, but
It was a tumultuous time, and I think that was part of the reason why I wasn't able to stay, because that was different for me. I can remember it was during the Patty Hearst situation, and I actually had a chance to see her boyfriend after he was released from being kidnapped, which they did a number on him. There was a lot of the Black Panthers were really active during that time, because Berkeley is, as a matter of fact, I had an apartment on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, which is where the Black Panther headquarters was in Oakland, California. And there was a lot going on. I mean, I think that it was probably a little more than I was ready for, because Pittsburgh is a blue collar city, you know. So coming from there to that environment was like, oh, this is a bit much. Plus, I was so far away from home, because you're on the other side of the country. So it was a interesting time that time. But, you know, there was some really good experiences I've had there, and I learned some good things, some interesting lessons there. But
didn't you say you were in the game, where the Stanford-Cal game, where the band ran on the field?
Yes, I was at the game when Stanford and Cal, when they ran on the field.
What were you thinking in that moment?
Boy, this was a phenomenal moment. You know, just when you get caught up in, when you're involved in the game, you get caught up in the game, you just think, you know, let's win at all costs. So I mean, that was a phenomenal moment, just to see that, and to see that, the high point of that game.
So you're in Pittsburgh for high school. You're coming of age, young man. What was that experience like? What are some of the high points, some of the low points? Like, what are the things that crafted you, that inform the way you look at life right now?
I think the things that some of the things that stand out most for me was the fact that to see so many people who have left poverty, who were like some of my ex-players or some of my friends, people that I got to know over the years, who were almost served like as mentors to me. To see how they moved out of the environment they were in, and how they progressed in life. But I also saw the ills of poverty, because we were not a well-off family at all. Like I said, my mother had went to college. She spent a couple of years at Norfolk State University. Okay. And so she did have some education. However, her primary concern was trying to raise her. It was 7 of us at that time, because I had a younger brother later. And it was a really difficult time for her. So I think, and I just kind of lost myself in sports. Sports was my way out, because, you know, for me, playing in sports kind of leveled the playing field for me, because you didn't think about whether you're black or you're white.
Yeah.
It's just whether you're good enough.
Yeah.
And that was my focus. And so it was kind of like an escape for me.
So you were literally on the borderline of Jim Crow, like space and time, right?
Yes.
I mean, what did you see growing up, as far as, let's be real, racist policies or racist people? Did you run into any of that?
I can remember going to Virginia as a kid, because we would go back to visit from time to time with my mother's family, my family as well. And I can remember seeing signs, and as I was telling Lena yesterday, I can remember seeing signs where it says "white only" on the bathrooms, or the water fountains, "black only." I could remember seeing those things. And hearing my mother say things to me. I can remember an incident where when I coming out of high school, you get letters from offers from different universities. I got a letter from University of Alabama, and I opened, and I was really excited about the chance to maybe even consider playing for them. And my mother said to me, randomly, she said, "Darrell, you can't go there, because they've had a horrendous reputation for racial incidents there." And we kind of eliminate that school out from the beginning. And those are the kind of incidents that made me think, wow, there's a lot more going on than I really know about. So I've had several incidents, like I said, with that, when I had it was in Virginia that I experienced a young man I told you, who said to me, "You don't know your place," you know. And so those kind of incidents just left a profound impact on my life, because made me think, wow, is it something that I've done, or is it?
Well, when I was thinking about here, you were raised by a single mom, and so you've made reference a couple of times. She did her best, but to be a widow at 29 with 6 kids, in my mind, she did a phenomenal job holding those things together. And then the loss of your biological father, all of these, you're well aware, puts you in the category almost of a statistical anomaly. Like, wait a minute, he shouldn't be successful. He shouldn't be able to rise. And yet, here you graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, right?
Yes.
University and then later it was Geneva College.
Right. Well, that's where I got my master's at.
Yeah. And so those are degrees in what?
My undergraduate degree is in psychology. Mm-hmm. My master's is in organizational leadership. Mm-hmm. And I was actually working at, my work life after football consisted of working. I was a counselor and a correction officer, but I worked in the prison system probably for the last 30 years.
So I'm going to defer to Gabe on just this, because he'll want to ask the question about your.
So you played in the NFL.
Yeah. So
who did you play for? What happened? And what was your experience like?
I had signed a 3-year contract with the Seattle Seahawks, and I got hurt. In a goal line situation.
Oh wow!
And I got rolled up on in a pile, and just tore the ligaments up in my ankles. I played high school at Wilkinsburg High School.
Okay.
I was at Cal for the 1 year, and then I played 3 years at Virginia Union University, where I was made a couple of all-star teams. But football, again, like I said, football was a great outlet for me, and I think it, for many young athletes, it's a great outlet. But I think what happens is people get so engrossed in the sport that they lose sight of life beyond the sport. Yeah. And I kind of, in some ways, fell into that as well, because, your dream is to be an NFL player or an NBA player, and the reality of the fact is, it is far easier to be a brain surgeon than it is to be a professional athlete, because strictly by the numbers alone.
Right.
You figure, and just say for the NFL, for example, there's probably 40,000 colleges, just an estimate, 40,000 colleges in America. Out of the 40,000 colleges, you might have maybe 500 people get invited to a camp, to an NFL camp. Out of the 500, you might have 60 that make the team. So the odds are not great for you, and I think, but the glamour and the glitter of the NFL and all the advertisement that comes with it are so attractive to young people. And I was the same way. My brother was the same way. My brother, he played, like I said, he played college football as well, but you get caught up in, and that becomes your outlet for that. So
did you see anything, any inequality or anything like that in the NFL itself while you were there?
Among the players, I don't think that's the case, but I was never part of the management, so I can't speak in that behalf. But among the players, I didn't see that happen too much, because the question is, can you play or you can't play? Right. Either you can or you can't. As simple as that, and the NFL, National Football League is what the acronym means, but in truth, it means not for long. So
yeah.
It's because if you can't play, you can't stay. I remember hearing Jim Zorn say that to me. You can't if you can't play, you can't stay. And you don't make the club on the tub. That was one of the little slogans that they would use.
Oh, dear.
So you got your bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
You played in the AFC West.
Yeah.
And then you're injured. So you got your graduate degrees afterwards,
yes.
Okay. So you went back to...
I went back to Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And I worked. I went to Virginia first for a couple of years. Then I went back to Pennsylvania, where I got my master's.
So you, not for long, you factor in also injuries and how that impacts a person's career, but you did make choices, and your life trajectory was, all right, now I've got to prepare for life after sports, life after the NFL. And so tell us about the major part of your life after that, what you spent those many years in.
I knew I had to do something because I knew I didn't want to be. At that time, my stepfather came in the picture, and he said, Darrell, you have to do one. If you don't want to work hard and be a laborer all of your life, then you need to get some additional education. And that kind of prompted me to. And then I've seen other guys who had played, and I see what the experiences they had. Mm-hmm. Statistically, the average NFL player is broke within 5 years after their playing days.
Wow.
And it wasn't until probably in the late 80s, early 90s that there was a real push to have players complete their education, because many of the players didn't finish school. Because football is a job. I mean, beyond high school, it's a business.
Right.
And if you see it for anything other than that, you are sorely missing the mark. Yeah. And so I knew I had to do something, and I knew I didn't want to be in a situation where I'm taking the menial labor jobs or didn't have the skills I needed to prosper. And because knowing that my mother had suffered like she had in terms of struggling with 6 children, I didn't want to be in a situation similar to that. And I also didn't want to be in one of the statistics where I have a lot of children and that I couldn't take care of. Mm-hmm. Because I think that is a major problem in the community, that we have so many young fathers who have children that they just can't take care of. And so those kind of examples are things that prompted me to get an education, to complete my education.
And so how did you get involved in the Correctional Institute and all of the things related to that?
It's funny. One of the guys who was a security guard at the one of our games in Virginia talked to me once. He said, you should come and just apply for a job here. Because I'd been out of school, came back, and I was just now trying to figure out what I was going to do. And he said, just apply for a job. So just out of curiosity, I said, okay, I'll go. But I applied for a job at a Richmond City jail at that time. And I was hired. But actually, 9 days after I applied for the job, I got the job. And I saw, and then there was something in me that wanted to be able to help people, to make a difference, because I saw a lot of people there, and it was my first true experience with people who had similar backgrounds to myself, who had fallen into a pit that they had no way of controlling how they get out of the pit. So it was an opportunity for me to try to reach out to help people, and I saw that. So what started out as, okay, just me looking for a job, turned into a 30-year career for me. Yeah,
and you're not going to do that over that amount of time without a genuine burden of I want to help people, and my experiences, etc., can be the springboard to being able to, help them, because you bring a unique perspective of both the highest highs and some of the lowest lows.
Right. And Pastor, I think that I can remember seeing some young people just made some bad choices in life, and that come from them not having the proper guidance. You and I have talked about incidents where young men are so misguided, and I've said on numerous occasions that boys who are not taught how to be men ultimately can grow up to be dysfunctional adults, and that dysfunctional adult puts them on that pathway to the prison system, which is what happens to many of the young men that I encounter while in prison. And some of them they have some of the most amazing talent. One incident I remember when I was working in a prison, I used to walk past this guy's cell daily, and he had a portrait in his cell. And I asked him, that's a really nice portrait. He said, how'd you take that and get that blown up like that? Because it was probably like maybe 18 inches by 10 inches. It was a huge picture. And I said, how'd you get that picture blown up like that? He said, that's not a picture, that's a painting. Wow. He had painted that picture himself while he was in prison. And I said, my God, look at the talent of this young man. If he could have channeled that talent into a positive direction, how much different would his life have been? And there's countless incidents that I've seen while people incarcerated who've done things. I've met guys who were chess masters. I mean, there was a man who had literally beat the Carnegie Mellon University computer in chess at the grandmaster level. He was that good, but he chose the life.
So maybe this is a perfect time just to fill in a couple of gaps, and the biggest one would be your own salvation experience, the journey that brought you to Christ, where he became the greatest treasure of your life. How did that all develop and happen?
Well, it started with my mother, because my mother was a Christian. I remember her having those big Bibles, this decorative Bible. She's always had that, and she would read the Bible regularly. We did go to church as a young man, but I wasn't saved then, and I wasn't saved then, but I would go, with my mother. But my Christian experience happened years later, I think, for me. I've had, in 2010, I had a health scare. I was hospitalized with a pulmonary embolism. Mm-hmm. And I can remember laying in the bed in the hospital, and the cardiologist comes into the room, and he says to me, he says, Darrell, why are you still alive? Mm. And
how do you answer that question?
God must have a plan for me. Mm. That was my answer.
Yeah.
Because, and at that time, I really believed that God had something for me. Just prior to him coming to that, I can remember having experience saying to myself, well, not prior, just after, during this whole illness period, I can remember me lying in the bed, because I've talked to my wife about that, lying in the bed and saying to God, if you took me today or tomorrow, I'm okay with that. Because I'd reached that place in my life. I mean, the sickness was a devastating experience for me, because I was hospitalized for actually 2 months, and I had to learn how to walk again.
Oh, wow.
because the atrophy of lying down constantly. And I could remember having to walk up because I had steps in the house I lived in at the time. And I couldn't walk up the steps, so I had to sit on my behind and slide up and down the steps, or crawl literally up and down the steps. And I can remember saying, God, if this is my time, I'm okay with that. You can take me. If I don't, if I go to sleep tonight and you don't let me wake up, I'm okay with that. So, and it was that experience then that made me say, God has something in my life for me.
Yes. So, listening to you and then also reading your text message to me, a very brief bio, but you started transitioning and moving out of or moving from the mindset of a victim, which is something that's very popular. It is promoted on lots of platforms, transitioning from thinking of yourself as a victim to thinking of yourself as a survivor. And then I would probably go a step further, and that is a thriver. But it is a very important distinction. It's obviously, from what you communicated to me, something you feel deeply about. Why don't you explain? We're talking about racial clarity, but in the context of these wider issues, how this is so impactful.
I think that too often people get caught up in the mindset that because I've been discriminated against, because I've had negative discriminatory experiences, that they allow that to define them. And for me, yes, having been in that situation, having had that mindset for at some point, I realized that that's counterproductive. And what that did for me is to force me to continue to look behind me as opposed to look ahead of me. And I think if we're looking ahead of ourselves and we see the vision, that's the only way we're going to ever see the vision that God has for us. We're not going to see it from looking behind us. And for me to make that transition from feeling like a victim to being a survivor, I need to realize that those are things that happen to me. They don't define me. So I needed to move past them, identify them for what they are, and move on, and just continue to seek what God had planned for me in the future. And I do believe, and I believe He had a purpose for me, because as I've said, when I was sick and I've had those thoughts that, well, if I don't wake up in the morning, and God would wake me up and allow me to persevere through those situations, I knew that I had to move on and change my mindset so that I don't wallow in pity, because victim's mindset causes you to feel guilty, feel sorry for yourself, and the athletic part of me says you can never prosper if you're feeling sorry for yourself. Focus on what you need to do and just do that. And it was as those awakening moments, that moment of clarity came for me when I was, right after I had those thoughts of God, if I don't wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
And God says, listen, that's what's happened. That's what happened to you. That's not who you are. So move on. Go head on. There's a plan for your life. And I really believe that. And it's shortly after that, I guess, I had an incident. I remember once I was going through some tough times financially. I was laying in the bed, and I said, God, I know, I've been sick. I've had these things happen to me. I don't know what to do. And God said to me, I have a plan for you. And He said that. That next day, I didn't have money. I was broke. I didn't have anything. That next day, a car dealer called me, a friend. It's actually a friend. He got to be a friend later on in life for me. But he called me and said, listen, Darrell, I know you're going through a tough time right now, but here, you come here, you sign these papers, I'll get a car for you so you can get back and forth to work. And you don't need any money. You don't need a down payment. You don't need anything. You don't need co-sign or anything. And it was that moment for me that I said, wow, God really is in charge of this. So incidents like that just reaffirmed my belief that I was on the path to moving from a victim to a survivor. And I think we really need to, all of us, people, particularly when we get to the place of, we're talking about people of color, accept responsibilities for the choices we make in our life and move on. Just do all that you can do. As long as you're doing all that you can do, you'll get past whatever you're facing. And that was the experience for me, just to continue moving forward and believing and trusting in God that he would help me get past this. I'm so grateful for that. And I think that it gives me a sense of peace, that knowing that God has his hand on my life. You know, and I know that had he not had his hand on my life, so many things in my life could have gone far worse off than they did, rather.
Well, this would be a good place. We're going to pick up our conversation with Darrell Hill next week on Door Church Connect. We're going to continue with some of the testimony and background that he's brought on the subject of racial clarity, that we would have, genuine clarity in a day and hour that there's a great deal of confusion. And so we want to thank all of you for listening. I'm not a very good spokesperson, so Gabe, why don't you do the promo and close us out? This is your gift.
This is my job here. Remember to like and subscribe, get us those 5 stars, help us to help you. And thanks to Mike and Miguel on the 1s and 2s. We'll see you guys next week.